Alex, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to hear your story because you and I are fellow community members of the Rhodium Weekend community online, and Mr. Yates is a good friend of both of ours and kind of the ringleader of a bunch of really cool people. And you didn't end up coming and doing your presentation, so I'm looking forward to kind of hearing your story and when we can get your voice and your story out to all the people that would have heard you. So I'm excited to dive in. You got a pretty interesting background. And for the listeners, maybe let's just start off, Alex. Like how, what's some of the background that you had and what led up to you joining and starting a business?
Yeah, it's of course a long story, but I'll try and keep it concise. In my early career, I guess I was, focused on making as much money as I possibly could. So I guess I started as a slinging insurance as a phone rep. So I was selling, those guys that call you up and they're like, "Hey, do you want to buy some life insurance while you're in the middle of the dinner?" I started out as one of those guys and threw myself into that field because I couldn't get any other work, and then ended up kind of rolling through as a team leader in call centers, which is a great way to learn management. If you want to ever learn how to manage people, having grown men cry at you when you talk about their performance metrics on the phone is a good way to get to really, know people. And after that, I, really started to chase the dollar. So I went into business analysis and project management and was making, good money as a contract consultant to different companies in Australia. So banks and telcos, and even some government work. And then in 2013, I moved out to the US, and I'd read practically every book on entrepreneurship that you could. And of course, the 4-hour work week was the top of that list.
Nice.
And, heavily into mixergy and all of that good stuff. And I'd been following this guy called Dan Norris. And Dan had a really interesting story. So he'd worked on a web design agency, had a web design agency for 7 years. He'd sold it, taken the capital from that, tried to build out a SaaS company. And I think he worked on that for 11 months, and around the 12th month, he basically burned through the capital and either needed to figure out an idea or go back and get a job. So he came up with this idea for doing 24/7 WordPress support. And the stars so aligned that I'd been reading some of his stuff as, a hungry fellow who's chasing the entrepreneurial dream, and, was really inspired by his story. And there was a blog post that he put out that I actually responded to in the comments. He was talking about the concept of, startup validation being nonsense. And so I said to him, "Hey, are you looking to partner up with someone to, get this thing off the ground?" Because I'd felt the pain of dealing with WordPress, WordPress themes and issues and everything else. And I always tell the story that I had a blog. I tried to edit the header. 4 hours later, it looked worse than when I started. So I figured if there were, more than 1,000 people like me out there who are semi
Right.
technically literate, there was a business opportunity there. So, we jumped straight into it, and a lot of big life changes happening around that time for me. But ultimately, we jumped headfirst into this opportunity, and the market timing was phenomenal because WordPress is a complex, ever-growing platform, and ended up getting some good traction with it. And ultimately, I think about a couple of years into the business, we had GoDaddy come and kind of knock on our door and say, "Hey, we like what you guys are doing. We're thinking of doing something ourselves. Do you want to talk about, joining the team?" So the in-between of all of that is where the real meat and potatoes is. But ultimately, all of these kind of stars aligned to have me land in GoDaddy at the end of December 2016. So, about 3.5 years of effort and building a remote team of folks all around the world, Philippines, Africa, Costa Rica, Hungary, and then taking that business and trying to build it at a scale which could support the GoDaddy base, which is a couple of orders of magnitude bigger than what we were dealing with at the time.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, right? So,
Oh yeah.
well, by the way, I just got a comment on that 4 hour header thing. I mean, like I've been down that rabbit hole myself, so it's like, oh my gosh. So, and you guys are pretty early on into this too, because I mean, like it's very interesting when, especially when you mentioned the 4 hour work week, I can kind of see how some of those dots connected to kind of lead you to that. So like when you would, going from that comment thread to actually having the conversation about, hey, there's a business, like how did you guys structure it? And what were the conversations you guys were having of like, what is this business? What do you want it to be? How did you buy it? What did you buy in? What was the kind of the inception of the business there between you two?
Yeah, it was completely sweat equity and completely me taking the risk off the table for Dan. So when I landed in the States, I had a 90-day window, which is I guess it's like for a motivated person, they basically put you on the bench. So there were 90 days where I couldn't actually get a job in the US.
Hmm.
So it was kind of forcing my hand to keep me busy. And it so happened that that 90-day window was after I got to the US, and I was in conversations with Dan and said, look, I'm not asking for any equity. I'm not even asking for any salary or anything else because it's such an early stage of the business. But let me work with you, and we'll see how we go. And then if we get some traction, post that window of time, then, we can get back into, equity split and all that good stuff. Because basically, like in the early days, 50% of nothing is nothing. So it didn't really matter. And I had something to prove anyway.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was willing to put in the big hours. But yeah, as far as like what the opportunity was and all that good stuff, like I had to pull back and look at the overall market and just work on the assumption that, keeping it really simple, that there were like 1,000 or more people just like me who'd been through that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And in hindsight, in retrospect, like the model that we work through, which is this productized service model, like if you get on a forum and you find people screaming about a problem like WordPress or a bunch of other different platforms, or even day-to-day things like transcription, podcast editing, all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like that can be spun up into a service business that can make you a bunch of money that you can run a team on, that can have a nice, exit at the end of it. Like it's not easy to get to, but that model will bolt onto practically any service that has an ongoing need. So yeah, just a little, I don't know, a little nugget there.
No, it is a little nugget too, and like we should put a pin in that and come back to it because I just interviewed Walker, who just wrote the book Buy Then Build, and I think
Mm-hmm.
because one of his biggest things is that it's very difficult to find the product fit and the pricing fit in the marketplace, and like what you're talking about is circumventing that whole painful process because you're just having people tell you what they want.
Oh yeah, and it's like it slaps you in the face. It's so obvious. And like as an example with WordPress, like WordPress was the platform that we chose. But when I had a call with a prospective investor, they're like, "Why aren't you doing this for all of the online platforms? Why aren't you doing this for Squarespace and Wix and Weebly and everyone else?" And then would be interested. And I'm like, well, it gets like significantly more complex to do that, but the opportunities are right there. So anyone could
Mhm.
pick it up and go and run with it and apply it to something that's painful that people are swearing at their computer about.
So when you guys, so after you, let's take maybe this in some chunks, is like along the journey is like, so you're then kind of working your butt off and you're proving yourself. What was the conversations you were both having? Was an exit in mind from the beginning, or was it in like
Not
no?
not at all. So I think in the early stages, it was just, I think we both really had something to prove. So Dan had years and years of challenge and struggle, and really done the hard yards as far as his web design agency went. Like he was doing the 3 a.m. phone calls and all of that stuff. So
Mhm.
he'd had a really hard time, and then had another year of pretty much failure after that with the software company. So it was like the short-sightedness was actually, I think, a benefit in some sense, because we were only thinking to like hit the next month's growth target, rather than some highfalutin goal about we're going to get this multiple or that multiple.
Mhm.
But what happened, and what I see happen with people that I work with in the coaching capacity, is they realize they're actually onto something, and they realize they're building like real equity and real value, and then along the same, I guess in the same vein, founder motivations change. So Dan and I had different motivations. We're going in different directions, and that was probably obvious about 18 months into the business. So we had to start looking and thinking about that, and working out what are our options. So in 2016, I basically I was convinced that one way or another there was going to be an exit scenario, whether it was me selling to Dan selling to me, or a company putting it on the open market, or maybe a company coming along and having a look at us and acquiring us. And we were just lucky that the timing kind of landed that GoDaddy was looking to solve a problem they had internally, and I was ready to put in the work to drive the acquisition process.
So what were the different needs and wants between you and Dan? What were the conversations that kind of led up to the point where you guys realized that there's, diverging interests?
Yeah. So Dan is a starter. He is the guy that gets in and starts stuff. And if you went back through the internet machine, or whatever it is, the Wayback Machine, you'd see that throughout WP Curve days, we started a bunch of different stuff while we were already sitting on a really viable business. So we started a community for content marketers, and we started a paid plugin that was similar to Lead Pages but very heavily focused on WordPress. And so he had this insatiable need to go out and start stuff and do stuff and build stuff and create. Where I was a little bit slower, and I was going, well, we can focus in on what this opportunity is and try and push it forward. But because where we're at individually, stages in our lives and everything else, we just were really focused on different things. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, to share with some listeners how you start to identify this stuff, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. You'll notice it within communication. So for us, our communication started to kind of drift away. I was a big proponent of that, and I started to really pull back rather than get mm-hmm. into what was going through my head, how I was feeling, where I was. And then I just started to pull my energy into other things, and started to do software consulting in San Francisco, where I was. So you see this, and I see this with founders all the time. There's an opportunity, there's something that if they kind of are consistent and push on it and focus on it, then you can go ahead and build something really sustainable and substantial. But it's not necessarily even a shiny object syndrome or anything else. It's just your motivation changes, or the novelty kind of wears off, or things come up in your life where what was a huge priority is not so big a priority anymore. Mm-hmm. But letting that fester, fester and not addressing it point blank. If I could go back and change some things, which there's a laundry list of things that I would do, one of those would be to go back and have these conversations up front and say, hey, we're going in different directions. Let's be structured and smart about how we do this. And when I talk to people who are thinking about getting into partnerships, I remind them that it is just as big a commitment as a marriage. You're going to be spending so much time talking to and working with this person, and you're going to have a lot of your financial eggs in this basket, and how you show up in that is hugely important. It takes a lot of, maturity, and mm-hmm. a lot of the times you only learn that after the fact, but huge learning curve with all of that.
Well, I can't tell you how awesome that was that you articulated it like that, because there's so many, honestly, I've been there, done that, and seen it in different companies I've been involved in. And, there's actually this personality test called the Colby, where there's a bunch of, and I can't remember all the different ways of how you show up and how you present, or how you handle decisions in the world. And one of them is quick start. It sounds like, Dan was a little mm-hmm. bit quick start. And it's kind of you get into it and you're doing these things, and you just being self-aware of it is difficult in the moment. And when you talk about you pulling back from a relationship, it's just the easier thing to do, because it's okay, there's so much stuff to deal with. How do you value the business? What are the different things? And you start to go into this mind thing. It's just easier to do other things. But then, like you had said, there's this financial asset that's there that if you communicate correctly, you can both figure out a way to handle it together. So how did you guys like start coming to, you know, like where did the relationship go, and how was the like the day-to-day handling there, and then how did you guys start having those conversations about what you both wanted to do?
Yeah, so we were, I guess the distance that we had and the time zones that we're working in allowed us to kind of do our own thing and work on our own stuff. So Dan was in Australia, I was in San Francisco, and just to get back onto that point of like fading out, which is something that I had done a couple of times. As the acquisition process for GoDaddy started to really take shape, I had to pull back from the consulting work that I was doing, but I also didn't really communicate that as clearly as I needed to my consulting partner, which I ended up having two very very fractured business relationships on my hands. So, on top of the mounting pressure of pushing the deal through and everything else,
Hmm.
you kind of lose sight of these things and just put your head down. But I think getting back to the original question, like thinking about like valuation and what we each want, um, because of the nature of our business, there wasn't necessarily comps. So you could go and look at a service business, or you could look at, like, for example, a recruitment business or
Hmm.
like a typical internet business. And at that point in time, which was 2016, I talked to a few different business brokers, and they threw a bunch of different valuation models at me, but it was very heavily, weighted towards SDE, which is seller discretionary earnings, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and like, as far as I was concerned, like I felt like we built something that was worth more than what I was getting as far as the valuation. And maybe it was partly pride, but the amount of like energy and effort that you pour into something, kind of, it becomes your baby. It becomes a part of you, and you don't want to go and like flog it off for a tiny multiple. So as the conversation started to tick over with GoDaddy and to dig into like what would this look like as far as a multiple went, I had a multiple in mind where I'd be like, yeah, that's absolutely, that's a sell and walk away kind of price.
Hmm.
But where it gets sticky, and this is another thing that gets sticky for founders, is the concept of, okay, I'll sell it and walk away. If you're integrating into a larger company is often going to want at least one person to stay back
Hmm.
and integrate and land the team and land all the product and the processes and everything else. And that became the contingency of the deal. Like, I kind of needed to be there to steer the thing, into port. And I was probably ready to let it go at that point. Like, I didn't want to. I wanted to see things through and make sure the team got looked after and everything else. But again, I guess the internal conflict that arises out of all of that is, you're hanging on. You want to do the right thing, but then you keep, like, you're doing this dance where you can't let go, but you need to.
So
But
much right. It's like
and
in
you know what I'm talking about,
Oh my
right? You
god!
know that pain.
Like I like how you say internal conflict, and I like it's like internal horrible torture. Is what it is, because especially as
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, don't you think, Alex? Like we're used to kind of just doing what we want. So like then all of a sudden when you're like almost trapped, you're just like, how do I get out of this? How
Well, here's the thing, and this is the mistake, and this is again a mistake, and this is cathartic for me to talk about. But the mistake I made is like, cool, like I'll put the team on my back. I'll figure out how to get this done. I'll go and make this all happen. And again, the ego and the pride gets in the way of some of this stuff, because it's like, I've got big enough shoulders to carry all of this stuff. But you know, after pushing the deal through and landing and having a bunch of personal stuff happen, you quickly figure out that you are human, and you will get eventually, like, all of this stuff will catch up and maybe, put you out of action for a little while, which is what happened to me. So, a lot of weight to bear, and especially when there's people's livelihoods on the line, because it's not just you looking out for yourself, but I'm looking out for, the 30 people that we brought over. So, yeah, pressure.
pressure, right? And so let's maybe kind of go back to the finances, and I want to kind of walk through like the actual process, because you saying you did it yourself, which I know I also can relate to, is extremely stressful. And what is when you're looking at the numbers, did you have a number, like did you do any like net proceeds or tax planning or something like that, going, okay, here's how much Alex and Dan are going to walk away with, and here's going to be what's contingent? Or was it just like top line, like, this is appealing enough, and I hope I have a pretty good understanding of what I get? What was your clarity in that?
Yeah, I like backwards modeled it from all of the different kind of tax standpoints, depending on so as I guess a bit of a story, when I knew that we were really in play, I read like a 200 or a 300 page book that was about M&A over a weekend, and basically did that ET thing where he picks up a book and like scans through the whole thing.
Yep.
So I gave myself a crash course in understanding the difference between an asset sale and a stock sale, and different tax implications and all of that sort of stuff. So I had it modeled very clearly as to what my net would be, depending on the different kind of structures that the deal will go through at. So I knew all of that back to front. And I did, like when I say I pushed it through, I had a great accountant. His name's Avery Dorland. He was very, very responsive, which is what you need in a time like that. And also had an attorney. His name's David Klein. And they work, I think they're out of Colorado, and they work with small to mid market companies that are going through acquisitions. They were super, super responsive, which was incredibly important because, if you're not hearing from the other side of the table as far as the buyer goes, you at least want to have your ducks in a row and be ready to hit on diligence or ready to answer questions.
My CPA went on a big hunting trip in the middle of our deal.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Or you can go and work. You can go and work with an attorney that just has you as you're a tiny part of their book of business, and they'll get to you in 24 hours or 48 hours, and you are you've got your livelihood on the line. So yeah, it's already stressful enough. You want to rally a team around you that's going to be available to help.
So super interesting, because you got your team that sounds like was pretty badass. And why did you decide to do it yourself? I mean, how did where in the lineup of you and Dan kind of figuring out this is kind of where we want to go, and then how long was it before GoDaddy knocked on the door, and what was your internal or personal journey of getting to the point where it was GoDaddy? How long did that take, and why did you not decide to use an intermediary?
Yeah, I definitely shopped it. I definitely looked around and talked to a few folks in San Francisco, and talked to different prospective buyers, and just kind of fielded it and try and get a taste of whether there was any, whether we had, whether the multiple that I was holding in my head was something that the market would bear. Mm-hmm. So I spent time looking at that.
Got it.
As far as the timing went, I think what had happened is Dan had other things going on. So he'd worked on the 7-Day Startup, which is a book that he wrote about, how to start something really, really fast, which is great for anyone who's just kind of getting off the ground. But he'd also kicked off a brewery. So he's right into beer brewing, and that was a real passion project for him. So I think at the same time that we went into the first meeting with GoDaddy, his brewery was opening or just starting on the Gold Coast. Mm-hmm. So he really didn't have the bandwidth, or probably the energy to do both. Or maybe he did, but he had a lot going on the home front, and I was all in and committed to making this thing happen because I wanted to see it through. So I said to him, look, I'm going to go 110% on this thing. And, I'll keep you, I'm obviously going to keep you up to date and informed, and, walk you through the challenges and the questions and stuff that we have. But I kind of want to go this one alone. And he was supportive of that. So he kind of gave me space to figure it out and work through it, and, do that crash course in acquisition, which is, I think it's amazing how much you can learn and how quickly you can pick things up if the pressure is on and if the heat is on.
Do you recommend doing it when the heat is on, or maybe a little bit at a time before the heat is on?
Yeah, if you want to, it all feels like a bit of a blur looking back, and I would say if you can find people that know what they're talking about and know what they're doing, save yourself the energy, because it is a process. It is something that there are experts available in. I know that Chris with the work that he does for the Radium Weekend stuff, he's like a great resource for figuring that out. Same with what you do. So like rely on the experts. There's a reason that these guys have businesses and services around this. Mine was more necessity, where I was like, okay, I need to push this through. I need to figure this out. So yeah.
Well, but you're right though. And it's interesting. I mean, look, when I started this podcast, Alex, I mean, like there was nothing out there. Like Built to Sell had barely even started. Like, there was just like so few resources, and you're like, and like even like half the M&A books have come out probably since we sold our company. And like, I found it difficult. We didn't have the resources that you had found, and I didn't even know how to hire them. I didn't even know what questions to ask. Like, I don't know, you you got a spreadsheet. You probably know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So what was it like, with the GoDaddy process? I mean, like, did you, and even before, like, we could maybe go into that, but like, how did you, like, when you said that the multiple, go back to the valuation question before we go into the processes, you probably, because you strategically knew your value to someone else, is there things that you knew that you were going to have to like write a narrative on, or like whether it was the employees that are going to be coming with, had you kind of like structured or thought about like how this was going to fit into someone else? And so there was like strategic value that you were kind of working on, and like what were the things that GoDaddy aligned with the extra value and the strategic value? Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah. And I think the advice that I give to other people is try and understand what's in the deal for the other party. So ultimately, like with our business, it was just a matter of GoDaddy could go and build what we'd built if they wanted to. Like they could figure out how to do it, but what they were basically paying for was time and reducing their risk. So they didn't need to spin up a team or a project to go and do it. They didn't need to figure out all of the plumbing. They didn't need to do any of that. They could just buy it off the shelf and kind of bolt it on. And I think understanding also the company's history of acquisitions. So I think at the time we were acquired, we were probably like their 17th or 18th or something acquisition. So they knew what they were doing. They had a process, they had a team, they've got great people in corp dev. So they had all of that in place. And understanding that and understanding, okay, like if certain things like tick over, or if you get past certain places in the process, then you have like a little bit more certainty, not as much as you'd hope. But you can say, hey, we're past the term sheet stage, or we're past this or past that. So yeah, I guess as far as like understanding where we were at, and like what value we held to GoDaddy, I was trying to be really pragmatic and not be like, this is going to be as significant as a hundreds of millions of dollars acquisition that is going to be front page news and there's going to be all this stuff going on. It's like, yes, this is one of the strategic pillars that they're building their strategy around, and they want to make sure that they can do it well. And I'm going to go into this with one, the assumption that things might blow up, and then two, the assumption that I need to build really good relationships with the people that are going to help me steward this thing through, because in companies like that, things change, and things were changing as we were progressing with the deal. So those are, I guess, a couple of things that people should remember. Like if you have, for example, a business sponsor, whether it's a director, a VP, an SVP, or even a CEO, get some time, get some face time with them so they understand who you are and what you're about. I went to drinks at the GoDaddy office in San Francisco on my birthday night in 2016. So I had to commit and go and meet, I didn't have to, but I chose to commit and go and meet the SVP and just spend, 15 minutes chatting with him and seeing what was going on, because there was going to be something there. So that's kind of like getting back to the people element. Like it's the people that push the deal through. So understanding that and, building those relationships is important.
Right. And sorry for interrupting. I was just curious, like on so doing all the PR, which makes a ton of sense. Had you known enough through the conversations about what this would have actually cost for them to build it, and like the lost revenue and opportunity? So did you stray away from like the EBITDA play and just say, hey, this is what it's worth to you guys? And like kind of how were you positioning the acquisition in light of what they with their needs and wants?
It was a bit of a dance. So ultimately, they didn't know that I think we were looking to exit. We weren't big enough for it to be, it wasn't something that they were going to spend a whole lot of time on. So that was like an opportunity. They did a bunch of research in the market, looked at all the competitors, talked to a bunch of competitors, did all their like diligence on their side. And part of it, I think, was just like pushing, like basically pushing, like I was pushing really hard to, keep the process moving with whatever I could do on my end to make sure that I was like spot on with, diligence and everything else. But as far as the multiple went and EBITDA and all that kind of stuff, they were generous, and like there's always a negotiation, we'll start at this and we'll go to that and everything else. But I think what often happens in those negotiations is that you both kind of know where you're going to land as far as the multiple goes. And you start at these poles apart, and then you meet in the middle. And that wasn't really like, as far as like the deal went, that wasn't really the biggest hurdle or sticking point. It was more about figuring out how to actually integrate the business. Because I guess, and again, to share this with listeners, if you have a multiple in mind that you can say, hey, I'm happy to sell at that price, then like that's good. Like it kind of takes that off the table. And once we got to that, then I could focus on the next thing. If you go into it and you start to feel shortchanged, or you're worried about vesting periods, or you're worried about these other things that, you feel like you might not have got your hands on, then that can can definitely sour things for you, and also take your attention off what needs to happen next, which is, figuring out, okay, how do we, go from this system to that system, or how do we like relaunch a product, or how do we do this in multiple different languages, or, actually get in and do the work that needs to happen. So once they arrived at the number that I felt was fair, that was it. Like we just kind of got on with it.
Interesting. Yeah. And then it was more about like the strategic synergies and how you'd actually like how they were going to harvest the value of the acquisition. Almost, it seems like.
Yeah, I think emotionally, and this is another kind of element, but emotionally, I wanted to make sure I could make it successful. So again, I had something to prove. I didn't want to just make some money from it and then just kind of bail out and leave the team hanging. I wanted to make sure that it landed and that, it hit what it needed to hit. And that was like, again, kind of like following through on the commitment and making sure that it actually happened and people got taken care of was almost as important as making the sale happen itself. Because if I just walked away and blew it up, then, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So that's an element too.
Well, and that's pride, which is nice. I mean, like you have self-worth, and there's a lot of people that might not take that approach, and which I think, puts buyers up on the defense, which I think why all the relationship building you did was super important, because they believed it. What was it like, Alex, like doing all of this by yourself while also trying to run a company? And I don't know how much of your time was devoted to the company day to day before you actually started this. And then not only doing it by yourself and running a company, but going up against a team of people that do this for a living. I mean, that's a lot to take in.
Well, I was really fortunate in the sense that I built a really great team. So as far as the business went, like day-to-day operations of the business, I had great team leaders in place that were running the team of WordPress developers. All the WordPress developers were like really great as well. So they all got on with it. So that allowed me to like really step back and, focus on what needed to be focused on, which was, pushing these things through. Now, as far as going up against a team of folks that know what they're doing, it's funny because there is this like a kind of combative nature. And we talked about this before the call started, which was, or before the recording started, which was, that I guess you've got different interests and you've got different things that you're striving for. A buyer wants to get value. A seller wants to get value. Where do you meet in the middle? Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, it was hard. It was really, really hard to know that, these guys or this team knows exactly what they're doing, has figured all of this stuff out in advance. And sometimes you feel like you're only getting snippets of information or like different pieces of the full picture. And you just want answers. And, that like once you're past, signing the term sheet and you go into a period of exclusivity or whatever else, then it becomes like the leverage definitely changes.
Right.
And you feel that pressure, you feel that pinch.
Yep. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it really starts, like the pressure just starts to compound. And I've seen this I've seen this with folks that I've worked with who have gone through the same process where it's just like, like a vice that kind of tightens around you, and you are trying to do as much as you can to influence and steer, but you don't necessarily have any influence and you don't have any force. So, you just got to, and I say this, and I hate when people say it to me now, but it's true, is like trusting the process. Like, if it's meant to come off, it's going to come off. You do your level best. And if it doesn't get across the line, well, you're going to learn how an acquisition process works. And that sucks. That really sucks. Right. But it's true.
Well, and
I kept telling myself that.
I was going to say, well, because there's so much psychology going on there, just because it's the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, so it's cost and it's just pure time and emotion. And I always said, mm-hmm. it's like, in what it's in its, and I don't know about your guys' season in Australia, but you're in the US plenty of time. Like it's like it's in May when school's about to be out and you're just like, I'm done. You know what I mean? Like mentally, and then to have that whole thing, like, wait, no, you're not done. Like that alone, I think makes people make sacrifices in that diligence process that they never wish they would have done.
And the problem with that, and this is the thing, like if you go in and then it's bitter and like there's something that happens in the deal that is like puts you offside or leaves a bad taste in your mouth, the buyer actually, like if they know what they're doing, they don't really want that, because they don't want a deal to land and they've put a bunch of work in and then hand it over to the business unit, and then you've got a pissed off founder or someone that's really sour. Mm-hmm. So, and I know that like with smaller companies that happens quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Where there'll be some chiseling that happens in the deal process, or the buyer will get too aggressive with something, and then the seller will land and just be really upset about things. Like it is still a relationship, right? So, I take the pluses and the minuses of it. I was fortunate in the fact that the acquiring team and the acquiring business unit understood some of this stuff. So they were respectful, and they knew that I was going to be stressed out, and they knew that this was a big change, and they wrapped a team around that to support it. But still, you go into a big company with an entrepreneurial kind of mindset, and then it's like, okay, it's me versus everyone. And this is another thing that happens all the time.
Yeah.
You forget that you're no longer running the show, and you are, like in my case, I became a director of product management. And like a founder is a generalist title, but a director of product management is even more ambiguous. And it's like, okay, I have to figure out how to create an environment where I can be successful, but I'm working in someone else's environment now. And that's another thing that just like will absolutely rattle you. So yeah, so much good stuff to dig into and all that.
Well, I got a friend, he's got a couple offers on the table right now. And I'm just like, dude, you have no idea what it's like to sit in a conference room with like 10 other people, and you think 5 of them are idiots, and you can't fire anybody or make any decisions. Like, you're not used to that. Like, just know that is going to be a scenario that could happen, and it's going to be unbelievably frustrating.
Well, it's a real patience tester, because and I cannot speak poorly of GoDaddy, because like what they do is amazing. They've got a brilliant business, CEO, CPO, these guys are legends. But the challenge is, like, as an entrepreneur, like you put your heart and soul into the work that you do. Mm-hmm. Like every day you show up and you like kind of leave it all out on the field. But for like folks that work at big companies, like that can just be a part of their life. Like it's just 8 or 10 hours they put in a day to, have income so they can pay their mortgage and spend time with their family. And it's just a completely different mindset. So, when you're in those 10 person meetings where 5 people are like completely checked out, and the other people are just like saying, whatever it is they said in the last meeting, and no one's taking any action from it, like that can be torturous, but you have to be prepared for it if you're going to be acquired by a big company, because that is what happens. And I was going to say I love seeing it, and I don't love seeing it, but I know it's a guaranteed thing where everything kind of stops, and you're in one of those meetings, and you're just like, wow, okay, this happened. Like I'm here now, so I need to figure out, what I can do. But yeah, it's part of it, man. It's absolutely part of it.
So What meeting? I'm sure you, when you just said that, you're thinking like I've got the specific meeting in my head that I was in when that happened, and like, so what were your two questions on that, Alex? Is like, like, were you like, what was your thought? Like, was it okay, I'm gonna be okay for a period of time, and like, how did you devise a plan? And because you're not there anymore, so what kind of led you up to,
Mhm.
and from that one moment that you had, and then did you have a significant chunk tied to any earnout or milestones that forced you to stay longer than you would have after you had that epiphany?
Yeah, so as far as the like, I can't specifically get into the deal terms, but as far as the money side goes, like I left a shitload of money on the table by not staying on the GoDaddy, like a shitload, and that I think for me that was like a personal decision that needed to happen because I don't think I was super happy. Like I just wasn't really happy doing what I was doing. Um, and as far as like, I guess the meeting and, those moments, like I have a few of them, but I guess one that was funny was when we would have quarterly business reviews, which is, like a typical kind of big company thing where you go around and retrospectively look back on the quarter. And I really enjoyed them because that's good face time with, the senior leadership. But for whatever reason, on that day, I just decided to dress down, and not everyone's in suits or
Yes.
anything like that. But I'm sitting in this quarterly business review, and I've got the CEO sitting across from me, the chief product officer, and like the chief HR guy, and I'm sitting there in like shorts and a t-shirt, looking like I just rocked up from the beach.
That's awesome.
And I'm thinking from their perspective, they're like, who is this big Aussie goose that just doesn't know how to dress himself? That's just like rocked up half-heartedly, looks like he's just swanned in from the beach. Like, but that was kind of where I was at because I was in some way like checked out a little bit. I
Mhm.
really was because I was like trying to figure things out. So, leading up to the departure, I think what had happened for me in 2015, I started coaching a founder because he was doing a productized service. I did it with him for 3 months. I didn't charge him a cent because I just wanted to get some of this stuff out of my head.
Mhm.
And then in 2016, I had another guy reach out. His name's Jake Jorgovan, and he was doing a productized service. I don't know, it was 2017. I'm getting my years mixed up, but yeah. Anyway, so he reached out and he's like, "Dude, I'd like really like to work with you in a coaching capacity." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like he pushed me for it for a little while, and then I had more and more people start to come to me, and I was like doing these coaching calls at 5 and 6 in the morning before I'd sign on to do GoDaddy stuff. So like I think like people were knocking on my door saying, "Hey, you have some value to offer here, or like we appreciate how you think about this and what you've done there." And it came to me, and it was like literally like slapping me in the face for a lot of the time. You know, like you want to see things through. So I had that conflict again where I'm like, okay, like a lot of money to leave on the table, a lot of money to kind of walk away from, but personal circumstances change and things that motivate you change, and sometimes the universe has a way of just like making that very obvious to you, where
Mhm.
like it almost doesn't feel like a choice in some sense.
That's, yeah, very insightful, and I think a lot of people that are listening could probably relate to those different circumstances where there's a fork in the road, but that it doesn't really seem like an equal decision because it's so obvious. And I think honestly, Alex, that's why with the listeners on like that have been tuning in for the like last few years, like if you can get to the point where you make it at least enough money up front that you're not unbelievably trapped, so that way you can make at least a little bit of you know horizontal moves without totally like blowing up your whole life. I find that
hmm
happen way too many times. I don't know if you see the same thing.
Well, when you say horizontal moves, you're talking about like having some optionality or being able
Right.
to go into something that you
Yeah,
that you
like not
enjoy.
have to sit in those meetings anymore, or like, work for that boss where like it's like so against your nature and you have internal conflict. And, I think so many people they're like, well, I need the money. And like the sale is all an earn out or all employment agreement or something like that. And it's too much money where like they don't have these other options. And it's one of the things it tears my heart away when you see that happening.
Well, I see, like the money thing is fascinating to me because I've had friends that have made, like 8 figures in exits or like significant money. But the problem is, like, you can really never have enough money because once you hit a particular like milestone that you're striving for, it just goes to the next level. Like you'll want 10x, and that's for whatever reason that's the way that we're wired, and it's hard to shortcut or circumvent. Like, it just not something you can necessarily turn off. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like the money, and this is like so trite to say, but the money just like will not make you happy. Like, it doesn't matter how much money you got in your bank account, how big your house is, how fancy your car is, any of that kind of stuff. Like, if your day to day is not aligned with like I get out of bed in the morning at 3:30 on a Wednesday to take a coaching call with a client in Denmark. I would not do that to go into a 10-person meeting, like a teleconference, to, just bounce around ideas that may or may not get pushed forward. And like, that's a good litmus test. Like, if you are willing to jump out of bed at 3:30 in the morning to do what you do, then hey, maybe the money will come. And that sounds a bit hippie coming from a guy that sold his company to a big internet giant, but that's some of the stuff that starts to bubble up after you have that, I guess, that time to reflect, right?
It's interesting, Alex. You know what I like after so many interviews of talking to these people that have made so much money, and you said it very well. And it's like I've kind of boiled it down to, if you can answer 2 questions every day when you wake up, is what really sweet problems do I want to solve, and who do I want to solve those with? Everything kind of recalibrates around that. I mean, because there's not really, I don't know, there's not really much else besides it.
Yeah, and it's like, and the other thing too, right? Like, with the work that I'm doing right now, I'll talk to founders, and you can get hung up on like, all right, this is my rate, or this is the engagement, or like I want some equity, or whatever else it is. But if you're in a position and you have the ability to like go out and be helpful to people and not expect everything in return straight away, then like you can truly like just do like have a really good, thoughtful conversation, be honest, and help them. And somehow or some way, this stuff will come back. And again, like karma and all that good stuff, like obviously, like I'm sitting out here in the bush and feeling, quite connected and everything else. But some of this is true, right? Like that window of coaching that I did with the guy in 2015, I loved it. I freaking love jumping on those calls with him. Like, it was right in front of me that whole time, and I did it for nothing. Like I didn't ask for anything, and I got a whole lot out of it. So sometimes that's a good litmus test as well, which is like, what would I do for free?
That's a great question to ask, actually. And I bet you'd be right, because then you maybe, that's awesome. So you have shared a ton, and there's probably hours and hours of stuff that we didn't even skim the surface on. If there's maybe something that you wanted to highlight that we've talked about, or something that we didn't touch on that especially because you're coaching now, so you've got kind of an idea of what people are looking for, and they want the crash courses, what would you leave people with?
Yeah, I think the point that I would make is that everyone's journey is going to be like completely different, right? So if you're looking for like education, or you're looking for, a how-to or whatever else, and something that's prescriptive and is going to tell you what to do here, there, like whatever else, like all of this stuff is really a contact sport, right? Like, you don't actually get to learn any of these things until you get in the mix. And I think Brene Brown talks about it, like getting in the stadium and, putting your neck on the line kind of thing. So whenever I work with anyone in a coaching capacity, I'm always like very clear on saying that every person is different. Everyone's got different needs, and there's no absolute like one size fits all way to get your problem solved. And if you like are respectful of that and honor that, then it takes a lot of pressure off, because you don't feel like you have to do something in a certain way. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the message that I would share with people. Like, I work with clients that are super organized, that have 50 Google Docs that, they've got everything kind of mapped out. And then I'll work with guys people rather, not just guys, but people that, fly into the call, whatever's on the top of mind they want to talk about. And that's okay too. Like, everyone has a different style. But as soon as you try and force yourself down a particular path, whether it be, an acquisition and you're working for a big company and it's really not your jam or something else, like one way or another, that stuff will bubble up. So, I think I keep getting this advice from friends and family and folks that are around me, which is like, be kind to yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll share that back to the listeners and hope it's helpful for them.
I think it's super helpful. I mean, like if you're out of balance with yourself, it's gonna eventually ripple into everything else, right? Like it's gonna show up and manifest itself in probably not very healthy ways.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think you and I probably we could share more of that with the listeners. What if they want to tell us a little bit more about your coaching, and then how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I coach founders now, and it's kind of like me solving a problem that I had, which I kind of wish I had an advisor or a coach through some of the stuff that I went through. I do like right now. I don't even know if I have spots available because I've got a handful of folks that I'm talking to for group coaching and individual coaching. But if people have questions or they want to reach out to me, my email is alex@productize.co. And the website is productize.co. So, I talk to people about the positioning of that and, are you really clear on what it is that you do and how you help founders and everything else? And I think productize is as like ambiguous as I can get where, it's memorable too. So running with that, working with folks individually and taking calls with founders and seeing how I can help and kind of taking it from there. So yeah, if people listen to this and they're, going through an acquisition or need a hand or just want to chat, they can feel free to hit me up and, I'll jump on a call and share what I can share.
I absolutely had a blast, and I appreciate you coming on the show, Alex.
Right on. Thanks for having me, man.